What is your thought process around like open innovation versus closed innovation?
In 2025, I don't think AI teams would be like a bunch of researchers in a room.
How do you suggest that a new AI engineer who's stepping into the space, or even somebody who's probably there in the space for like quite some time, I'm curious, like how do you handle fallbacks? Like in terms of when you're building your agentic AI systems, how do you typically design for fallbacks? I have a fun question for you. Hi everyone, I'm super excited to be here at the Snowflake Summit, and I have Dwarak Rajagopal with me, who's the VP of AI Engineering at Snowflake. I'm super glad to have you here.
Great to meet you, Aish, and I'm super excited to be here as well.
I mean, I have a lot of questions for him. I've been hearing a lot of updates. Just recently, I was at the demo this morning, and really exciting product launches you have. And one of the most fascinating things for me is a lot of times AI companies are building AI tools for a hypothetical data set, which is like lying somewhere. But I feel like the approach that you have taken is, hey, we own the data stores. We know how the data infrastructure works. And now we're going to build AI on top of that, which felt like extremely on point. And it felt the integration is very, very seamless. So what was your direction for it?
Yeah, I think this is one of the core principles for us, especially when we think about AI. It's not going to be like simply adding an AI feature on top of it. We want to kind of rethink overall how people use AI with data. So how do we bring AI into data is like super important.
Yeah.
And there are three basic kind of pillars within that. So if you think about it, the first one is like we want to provide a very unified platform where you could have your data, your models, as well as your applications all at the same place, where you could go and actually do it in a very secure and in a manner which is very fully governed overall. The second point was basically you want to have access to all of the different kinds of models. That includes both open source as well as closed source models. We actually kind of rethought how we actually integrate both of these in a very secure governed manner.
Yeah.
And the third one is in terms of how do we have natively built AI apps and agents on top of Snowflake. And so these are kind of like three main key elements that we've been like building AI.
That's wonderful. And I think you sort of stole my question, which was about like open source versus closed source, right? You've worked at Meta, you've worked at Google, and both those companies and like other, I don't want to name the companies, but then other companies have different approaches to think about large language models or generative AI, right? Which is like, hey, we want to go the open source way or the closed source way. What is your thought process around like open innovation versus closed innovation? What are the pros and cons that you've typically seen?
Yeah, I think if you think about in any industry over the past multiple decades, there's always been a choice between like open source and closed source.
Yeah.
And it really depends on what is the need and what kind of applications that are needed. Our approach is basically how do we provide choice? So we support obviously Llama models, DeepSeek, Mistral, all of the top main open source models, but also have both Anthropic and OpenAI frontier models as well. And we want to kind of make sure that depending on the use case, depending on the quality needs, and one of the things that also we see, the space is moving very fast.
Yeah.
And some models are specific for some. For example, Claude works very well for the coding use cases.
Yeah.
We have orchestration needs which are different. And so we kind of want to give that choice. And one of the things with respect to the open source or open innovation is like if you think about the speed in which the innovation happens, I think sharing stuff, open source, that's like super important.
Yeah.
Not just in the model space. Like we at Snowflake, we've been like basically doing a lot of inference optimizations with respect to Swift KV caches. We recently announced Shift parallelism, and all of our infrastructure that underpins, we're actually open sourcing it as well. So there is a mix of both open source as well as using the frontier models.
Frontier model. That's very cool. I was actually very intrigued by the conversation that I had with your product team this morning, and they were sharing about this interesting methodology that they're using for AI SQL with like AI summarization amazing. Like it's just so well thought of, and I feel it takes away a lot of grunt work that people had been putting so much effort on. And I feel like in the nicest way possible, there's probably a lot of businesses that will go out of business because of the product that you've built. And yeah, like very, very amazing product.
So I think the key part there is we want to make all of our data analysts
Yeah.
to be an AI engineer as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how do you kind of make it in a very seamless way? So data analysts can actually write their SQL code, but actually use generative AI, unstructured way of calling things.
Yeah.
Very, again, core, it's where AI is integrated deep into our infrastructure.
Yeah.
And we are very excited to see how folks are going to actually build on top of it.
Yeah.
And super excited so far.
Super, super interesting to see that, like their entire data transformation piece or like the data cleaning, pre-processing piece, like going out. I mean, not entirely, but I feel like still like makes it very seamless for data analysts.
I think that, yeah, very, very, very true. One example is like, we want a marketer. They could query a customer segment data. What we think about AI native here is basically somebody who can actually write it in like natural language, and then they just get like the dashboards, which is powered by all of the unstructured and structured data without the need for doing ETLs, for example. So how can you do it in a very seamless way? That's kind of what we think like what AI native needs to be.
Very fascinating to also see like the multimodal capabilities in there, which is like, hey, you have like one structured table, but it has like embedded images in it, it has text, it has numbers, it has like pretty much all sorts of information, like audio files as well you're integrating, right?
Yes, I mean, you will see a lot more of this in the coming days as well. And unstructured data, there's plenty of unstructured data already in Snowflake. People have a lot of, for example, customer calls. And usually what happens is somebody has to go write a ETL, transcribe it, and then do some pipelines. And so it takes a whole lot of effort to actually convert. Now you could go and ask, like, hey, what is the customer sentiment generally for this product from a customer calls segment? So you could just get an answer directly. So we are trying to bring the barrier. So when we have all the data, how can you make the insights very easy for folks?
Fair. I'm actually very curious about something, and this sort of like, piggybacks on your experience working at so many other tech companies. And when I started my journey with machine learning, I felt a lot of things were still like, building from scratch. Be it like neural nets or building like BERT models, which were different from abstractive summarization and extractive summarization. But we have moved to a point where it just feels all of that complexity is an API call away. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And another thing that I feel is like back in those days when I was working on these machine learning techniques, there were a very small group of people that I could really talk to this about and who would understand, what's the implication, or like, AI applications itself used to be like a huge conversation. But now, since 2022, and I would say a big contribution to that was because of ChatGPT like getting launched and getting in hands of everyone, like including my mom, who like probably didn't know anything about AI, and now she's like, she's seeing all sorts of like AI podcasts on YouTube. Like I see her recommendations, and I'm like, wow, lady, you're like going through all of these content. It sort of democratized the concept of like what AI means to people who are not data scientists. And that's a wonderful explanation how you brought it up, where data analysts can now become AI analysts or AI engineers. So I want to hear your perspective on how you see non-AI teams, like non-traditional AI teams, becoming AI teams. Like, what does the new AI team look like?
I think that's a great question. I think in 2025, I don't think AI teams would be like a bunch of researchers in a room doing it. I think I think the best AI teams would have, of course, you need researchers, you need scientists, ML scientists, but it requires a combination of product managers versus also infrastructure. So you need to kind of have a mix of all of this to actually think about how AI is going to be core inside the product rather than like just a feature. And I see this in like similar transitions in the past as well. If you think about, say, mobile, in 2012, companies that even like Google and Facebook would have like a mobile team, while after a few years, everybody was doing mobile. And I see similar trend actually moving for AI as well. Like I think everybody needs to be part of like AI. In terms of like understanding their dialects.
Yeah.
And it's making it easier basically with like the natural language processing
Yeah.
in terms of like handling these things. So that's kind of like the key element. And one of the examples that what we are trying to do with respect to like an outcome of this is like building a product called Snowflake Intelligence.
Yeah.
Which is basically where like every business user could now have access to like actionable insights
Yeah.
directly across these data platforms, both unstructured, structured,
Yeah.
in a way. And that is a very, very hard problem to
Very
solve.
hard problem to solve. I saw the demo this morning and there were like interactive charts being produced and I was
Yep.
like, damn, that's cool.
Yeah, so to build a team to doing that, you need
Yeah.
to have both data scientists,
Yeah.
you need to have data engineers,
Yeah.
you need to have ML researchers as well as infrastructure engineers to kind of make all of this actually work hand in hand.
Yeah.
And a key element is like how do you dog food your own product is one of the
Absolutely.
key elements.
I
as
feel
well.
it's also a lot of like the design considerations that went in, because when I was chatting with your team, they were telling me how they have automated the process of metadata creation as well on top of the data sets, which is pretty fascinating. And like, as I said, like a lot of businesses, a lot of startups started with that as a product, where they're like, oh, you have a lot of unstructured data, you have different kinds of data sources, different versions of it. Some of them are like traditional old data versions and some of them are new. How do you combine them and like use them together with that semantic layer in mind? And that was also like pretty fascinating that they're able to do that using AI, like automated.
Absolutely. One of the things that we are working hard is like how do you ingest these dashboards
Yeah.
and kind of understand the semantic model automatically. And that's one of the key elements. We also have OpenFlow, which is going to be announced, which is where like we can now have connectors across all different kinds of data, both structured as well as unstructured. So you could, when you're doing Snowflake Intelligence, you can connect with your Google Drive.
Yeah.
You could also connect it with your Salesforce data. And then you can ask questions where it can kind of do almost like a deep research, like Google Drive documents, as well as with Salesforce, and kind of give you insights, which is kind of fascinating. And we've been actually using it internally. And it's actually amazing for us to actually see how things are being useful for us.
Super cool. I feel like that's one of the most fascinating things, which goes from like, here's what we saw in prototype. Like, this is how we saw the core general intelligence of a model. And now when we put it in action, which is like in production, in scalable data sets, in messy data sets, in all sorts of like, different variety of data sets, which is like context understanding, domain specific understanding. That's the real challenge. And I think like you have done a wonderful job in making that hard problem being solved so seamlessly using your Snowflake Intelligence. I'm curious because as you mentioned, right, like you're using different tiers of model. You have like your Claude models, you have Mistral, you have DeepSeek models, you have like combination of both the models. I'm curious to see like what your thought process is on the way the model space evolves. Do you think it'll still keep evolving in this chase of general intelligence, and how we can have this like one model, like 400 billion parameter model trying to achieve on top of all the benchmarks? Or do you think there'll be like a diversion? And with DeepSeek R1 releasing their 0528, they also release their distilled models on Quen. Yep. And that diversion is something that I'm observing, where people are more diverting towards distilled models. And even your team mentioned that for their AI SQL product,
Yep.
they have like two different models that diverts the traffic into the smaller model, which solves the easier problem, and the bigger model, which is a more reasoning dense problem, to save on latency and the cost, right? So what do you feel in terms of like how that space will diverge? Do you still feel like we'll go towards general intelligence or like more domain specific ones?
I think the way I think about it is like there are three knobs, like quality, latency, and cost.
Yeah.
And so depending on how you want to turn these knobs based on the application, you need to have a different kind of underlying things that could involve a bigger model versus smaller model.
Yeah.
And what I see is there might be abstraction layers where like you might see that it might appear as if it's a one model, but underneath there might be multiple models in the space where you kind of have to figure out which one to call. For example, on AI SQL, we have this model cascading. So we decide which model to call based on what is the right kind of thing to pick.
Yeah.
And so I do think that is going to continue in terms of doing things. The other thing is also For interactive workloads, you need to figure out how to kind of have a smaller model. And one of the examples what we use is like some of the open source models where you could kind of post-train them, and you could it not just improves the speed, but also actually improves the accuracy as well. So I think the way we start is like we start with generally the biggest one to kind of see the quality, and then once you kind of have a thing, you kind of then figure out what is the best experience for the user. And so having those options would be important, and kind of having this way to kind of pick which one to use is also an art rather than like a science in some sense. But that's something which is going to continuously evolve.
That also reminds me of like how feature engineering used to be. It's like more of an art than a science, right? Like that's a wonderful insight that you gave me. I have a fun question for you. So you've been in this AI engineering space before like all of the Gen AI hype came in, right? What do you think is like the most overhyped stuff versus underhyped stuff in this entire AI engineering landscape?
That's a great question. I think, I mean, you could see everybody talks about AI, putting AI in every problem.
Yeah.
And usually you don't necessarily have to do that, and it's probably more costly. And so I still think like predictive methods are actually very, very strong in certain things. So I think that's an important thing to kind of understand. The other, even within the LLM, I think the general trend was like bigger is better. Usually, that's the other part. I think people often underrate the importance of quality of the data. And absolutely. Having the quality of data, eval, that iteration. That's like super underrated in my opinion. And that we even in our product definitions and product development, we see a big difference when we actually focus on like the data, what is the right data to actually post-train or train on. That makes a big difference. And the other underrated part I would say is, even though there's a lot of talks about agents, I think how do you build a product that is going to be reliable, robust, safe and secure, and kind of in your production environment is a hard problem. And I think that is going to be one of the big focuses, I feel like, for this year and next year in the industry.
That's lovely. I'm curious, like how do you handle fallbacks? Like in terms of when you're building your agentic AI systems, how do you typically design for fallbacks?
Great question. I think it's the way we think about it is like for example, let's take Analyst or Snowflake Intelligence, where we have verified queries, where we kind of already see that this is something that we have seen it before, and kind of use that to kind of answer questions first. If it is not, then you go for clarification questions. So generally, one of the key elements for teaching AI is to not just hallucinate, but to actually ask whether if it is not fully sure that this is the answer. Kind of train that to kind of ask a kind of clarification question. That makes a big difference.
But still having like human in the loop, right?
For sure. So the verified query is basically the way it is. That is the human actually verifies, and then says this is like something that is good, and then it kind of goes in. So it's a super important aspect of it.
Yeah, makes sense. I want to like, based on like, your experience, you've seen probably the space evolve from like what was non-hype AI, which was inside the research labs. And like, even when you started working on PyTorch, right? It became a huge hit in the space. And like, I feel that's one of the reasons why ML became so huge, because like, I feel like contribution of PyTorch in the community is just like hands down, And we have seen like the entire space evolve so many times. There's so many different tools, and I personally try to keep up with as much as I can, but I feel like that's a full-time job. Like I need to have like a third job in order to like do that. So it's just extremely hard, right? And I feel like till date, I find myself in the space of like, hey, I have to like pick up some books, which sort of takes me in like a structured manner to learn a particular tool, or like go through the docs, or go through like a deep learning course, or go through like some GitHub repositories, build something out, or do like a papers with code. There's just so many different variants of it. How do you suggest that a new AI engineer who's stepping into the space, or like even somebody who's probably there in the space for like quite some time, but just the space is moving so fast, how do you really manage to keep up, and is it even required to keep up?
Yeah, I think, again, great question. It's a hard question. I think I do have the same question for myself in some sense. But one of the things actually, as you pointed out, actually, more than, at least for me personally, more than like reading like books and stuff, I actually the latest things happening with like trying myself, like
Yeah.
using
Yeah.
GitHub, try writing a code,
Yeah.
see how it works, learn from it. That's something which was very, very, at least for me, useful. And the thing is, it's so easy to do these things more. A lot of stuff is like open source.
Yeah.
So starting from there makes a
Yeah.
big difference. And one of the key elements which like being part of the community also helps. So
Helps, yeah.
understanding if you can like be part of like some of the open source community. Generally, folks are very, very open in like sharing things,
Yeah.
and so taking advantage of that is like super important.
Nice.
And yeah, there is always this fear of like what is the new thing that's coming up. Sometimes there's a lot of hype in some of
Yeah,
these things as
yeah,
well. So
yeah.
you need to kind of have a balance.
I can't tell you how many system cards like I've been reading about the models. There's just so many of them coming out. It's just hard to like keep up, right? What are the topics that you expect? Like you're leading an engineering team. What are the kind of topics that you would expect your team to have hands-on experience with?
So, like I said before, I think in my team there are researchers, there are engineers, infra, quality. I think this is a very interdisciplinary area. One of the key learnings from my PyTorch experience is that, for example, PyTorch, you need to have compiler engineers, you need to have language folks, you also need to have quality, deep learning specialists. So I think the key element of AI is like how do you kind of intermix interdisciplinary folks to
Yeah.
kind of empower them to work together.
Yeah.
And hands-on experience on all of these for that particular domain is like
yeah.
super critical. Most like all of them in Snowflake engineers are like hands-on. That's kind of like one of the key elements. And we operate like a startup in some sense.
That's
So-
actually, again, I'm telling you, you're stealing my questions. That's another thing. Like a lot of times what happens is even in a startup, the agility somewhere becomes a foe where you're like, if we are building super fast, then we are probably going to lose on the quality or lose on the broader vision. Snowflake is a huge company. So how do you maintain that like startup mindset in such a big corporation?
No, absolutely great question. I think this is like $1 million question for everyone in the world in some sense. I think one of the key things is like how do you kind of scale your work but not scale red tape? That's like a key element.
Yeah.
And one of the things we actively did over the last 7 months is that we have this email kind of list where anybody in Snowflake can say that they're having problems, and the email list is like a red tape at Snowflake
Yeah.
or something like that. And all of the engineering leaders are actually in that list. So we actually take time to look at how can we kind of improve the process or not actually have the process at all in some of these things. That's one of the key kind of things that Sridhar and the full leadership team actually are like accountable for it. The second part is like how do you make decisions? And oftentimes wrong decisions are better than no decisions. And one of the key elements is we have very, very fast decision making. And also empower people to go make decisions. It's okay to fail,
Yeah.
but just try. The fast iteration like always generally wins. And there is this, I mean, obviously cliched saying, but it's actually very true, is that execution kind of beats strategy for lunch in some sense. So we focus on like going fast, doing it in a way where we could learn, iterate, and do that. And that's kind of part of the thing. One of the things we do it for a leadership team as well as like the AI war rooms. Every week we have these war rooms where all of the AI leaders, including sales, marketing, everyone, product, eng, research, all come together to see what is the blocking thing for this week, how can we make decisions, move forward. So it's a very, very fast-paced environment.
Lovely. What you have mentioned, like you have very subtly said this, but then it's super important that it comes from the leadership, that sense of, hey, you have a free hand, or like, you can go about an experiment. It's okay to like try and fail. I think that comes from the leadership, and that's something that comes as part of the culture. And I'm very glad to hear that that's the kind of culture that you're maintaining.
Oh yeah, I mean that's one of the most exciting things for me coming at Snowflake is being able to actually do things over the last. I mean, I've been here for the last 6 months. I feel like I've learned so much, and I've seen like the amount of products that we are churning out has been like at breathtaking speed as well.
Absolutely wonderful. So I know we discussed a lot of things here, and there are a lot of resources that I would like to share with you, a lot of the things that I saw as part of the product demos. So I'll take a stab with Dwarak and put together all of the resources and share it as part of the video. Well, it was so nice to chat with you, Dwarak. It was
thank you.
amazing chatting with you. I feel we
Great.
covered like everything that I had in my mind, and you was like jumping ahead of me, like with getting to topics that I wanted to chat with you about.
Thanks for having me. Great to chat with you as
Thank you
well.
so much. Have a good day.
Thank you. All right. Yeah.